Hi Lakers, Mr. Ream here. This video is going to be covering the fall workshop for the sophomore classes. And in this presentation and information session, we are going to be talking through a couple different things that directly impact the 10th grade year. And I'll talk through some common problems. We'll hit on some A through G requirements as a second year high school student and maybe a second year high school family. This is going to hopefully not be brand new to you. Hopefully we've had an opportunity to talk to you about A through G and some of these things that maybe you're hearing about for a second time at this point. We'll go over a little bit about some common pitfalls and sophomore year overviews. We'll talk briefly about some testing stuff that starts to pop up in sophomore year for some students, and then start getting into ideas about how to access and start thinking about this idea of life after high school. Because while we're not making active steps in actually applying for any schools or anything like that, we are going to start wanting to let our brain marinate a little bit about what kind of things am I interested in? What are the things that I start gravitating towards? What do I want to be available to me as well, so I don't close doors that are harder to reopen? Okay, so we'll take some time and do that. Before we dive in, though, I do want to just emphasize we do have a website. I want to encourage students and families to access and utilize this website. It is kind of buried in our school website, so if you make your way to the North Tahoe High School homepage, in the programs menu, in the top menu bar or on your hamburger bar if you're on your phone, if you click the programs menu, you'll see on the screen with the arrow, there's a counseling and wellness area that you can click on in that menu, and then that will take you to this page, and this has a little bit of an overview. It links to our wellness center, but also our counseling page. And so if you click on the school counseling link there in that blue box, that will take you to our counseling homepage directly. So this is actually what you see on the screen right now is not the counseling page. There's nothing really on here. This is a kind of current screenshot as of this recording. We do update things. You might notice some things look different or stuff like that as years go on, but we work on keeping this page up to date, and there's a lot of really helpful information on there, which we kind of talk through a little bit. But one of the main things that you'll notice is there's actually a button, if we go back on this page up here, right up here, that talks about how to book your appointment. So that appointment system, we do run our appointments and meetings for what we can by like allowing students and families to make their appointments online. It links with both of myself and Jennifer Django Cohen's, our other counselors, live calendar, so you can actually see our availability. And that's going to guarantee that you have some time. Occasionally, we might be able to accommodate drop-ins or things like that. If there's a crisis with a student or something like that, we're going to try to move our schedules around as best we can to accommodate those things or make sure that we see students or families in like a dire need. But generally speaking, you're going to have your best opportunity to sit down face-to-face with us or ask questions if you make that appointment online. So that's one of the biggest things, and we are here to really help. That's really our goal. We want to be helpful. But you know, our access sometimes is a little bit challenging depending on the time of year. For example, in the fall timeframe, the senior counselor tends to have many senior meetings going on, a lot of college application timeframes. So kind of in our current structure of how we break up our counseling department, sometimes it makes it a little more challenging because we also have sophomores typically in that kind of like cycle of events. When we have seniors, many times we have the sophomore class as well. And so we tend to sometimes be super swamped in the kind of early to mid fall timeframe with our senior kind of expectations and requirements. Emails are always going to be a quick option to potentially get a reply from us in a fast fashion. Okay, so please do ask questions though. We want to encourage that. That's a very important part of this process. I'm going to take a few minutes, and this is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but I think it really provides a little context to some of the other stuff that we'll talk about. And it also just reminds us as adults who were once sophomores in high school that, you know, our way of thinking now is not likely the way of thinking that we had when we were in high school, being 15 or 16 years old. And we have the benefit of looking backwards now, and we also have the benefit of a fully formed brain at this point in our lives as adults. Our 10th grade students do not, unfortunately. And so that is some of the things that we start to notice when we're working with sophomore students. And so this image that you see on the screen is really a kind of humorous, but not all that wrong representation of what's going on in a typical teenage sophomore brain at any given point in the school year. And so very much so we're kind of going into this idea of like they're still growing up, but then they're starting to want to go into this kind of rebellion phase you see, or having an ego, or really kind of getting involved with, like, say, romantic relationships. And those are some things that we start seeing students in 10th grade really diving into. They also tend to maybe start driving. They maybe have some more independence. And while that's good, sometimes they lack some of the decision making. And so kind of how our brain tends to work and what we end up using our brain for is kind of like we have the bottommost thing, the reptilian brain, that's our instinctual or dinosaur brain, what they say. So that controls our breathing, our basic bodily functions and human needs, right? So it's going to regulate our temperature, our breathing, our heart rate, things like that. Okay, so that's like the very basic stuff, not a whole lot of higher order thinking. You have the middle brain, which is that limbic brain. That's where a lot of our emotions and feelings actually come into play. And it's connected to both the neocortex, which is that larger kind of gray matter that you see towards the top of that brain. And that's where a lot of our higher order thinking, that's where our rationality, that's where our ability to pre-think about things really comes into play. And each of these different things are interconnected, but they also work somewhat in isolation. And so they have to kind of work together as a team, but sometimes one particular area of our brain can potentially override other areas of our brain that really kind of are a big deal, right? An example might be, so that limbic brain, the amygdala and hippocampus and things like that, all of those things are going to be in charge of regulating our emotional states. And so one of the things that we notice in a lot of teenagers, especially in this day and age, is a lot of times we kind of use the analogy of we flip our lids. So basically a student's brain is here, and if they flip their lid, that means that neocortex, that thinking part that really lets us, like, hey, how would my parent respond to this type of outburst? Or how would it respond if I drove 100 miles an hour around 28? Sometimes just goes out the window, and they're looking at it from an emotional standpoint, and it really kind of takes over, often for short periods of time, but it could be extensive for some circumstances or situations. So we have to kind of understand as adults that we have a little bit of a benefit because we've actually gone through some of the maturation processes in our brain already. So current research kind of says 24, 25 is actually kind of the year when our brain kind of hits maximum development in terms of kind of like having the pieces that it needs to make good decisions. The funny thing is that's right about when most students actually leave typical college age. And so everything up until then, our brain is still growing and making connections and developing. And so we can see on this example, this is a screen or some imaging of a growing brain. And kind of the components, these purple components are the activity elements. And so how much that purple activity starts to expand as the age increases. And so most sophomores are actually kind of living in this range right here. And what you notice is kind of these front areas that are still kind of in the green sphere are the prefrontal cortex areas. And that is the thing that really emphasizes the ability to think critically about future decision making, logic, kind of like good decisions. And it's no shocker when we have students making poor decisions who are maybe 15, 16, or even 17 or 18, because they literally are lacking a key component in their brain and it not fully functioning. It is there. They still can make good decisions, but it is just not running at full speed yet. And so us looking back as adults, we kind of live in this highly involved brain process where we can look backwards and we have the benefit of hindsight, but we can also have the benefit of looking forward about, hey, if you don't do this now, it's going to impact you later. A lot of times students actually aren't thinking about or can't think about what their decision today that they're making about maybe to ditch class, how that would impact, say, their college application chances or their grade on their next test. And so part of our job as adults and our job here at school is to help try to mitigate some of this process that we see students really kind of like having and help them get out of their own way a little bit. Because realistically, what tends to happen are some common problems we start seeing in sophomore year. Students, like I said, start maybe driving, or they start getting their permits, and they start to feel like they are mature and old enough to start making their own decisions. And we do want to encourage more and more of kind of the ownership of their own processes. However, sometimes they don't really do the informational seeking or find good information or reputable information to really make those good decisions happen. And sometimes, again, that brain gets in the way. We often see sometimes the prioritization, that lobe of the brain tends to sometimes include also platonic relationships, so like their buddies or their friends and kind of like their sports teams. And so a lot of times, sophomore year tends to be a lot of kind of revisiting the social hierarchy and the social awareness that they maybe had started in middle school, and it kind of revisits in 10th grade sometimes. And sometimes they'll even do so at the expense of their academics. And so just realizing that sometimes pops up in 10th grade is a important factor. There's this magical time that I've noticed over my time working with students in high school between 10th and 11th grade. The 10th grade summer is really kind of like, especially in young men, but across all students, it's common, where 9th and 10th grade students tend to not be able to connect what they're doing now to what kind of is coming down the road, partly because of that brain piece that we were just talking about, but partly because it still feels very far away, and kind of like students are kind of doing the things that we are telling them they have to do in their schooling. Most of their classes are kind of like prescripted because it's kind of the basic requirements of graduation or college requirements. And then in 11th and 12th grade, they start to have some more freedom. They start to really realize that, wow, this actually is going to result in something that I got to make some decisions in. And so they are kind of tend to be in this 10th grade year, in the last year of kind of like this disconnection about how what they're doing now may or may not influence their lives down the road. And so they kind of are still living in this kind of neverland of I'm just doing the things because the adults tell me I need to do that. Sometimes they also start to over rely on potentially the adults. This often is the last year that they do this as well, but they still rely on adults to make things happen for them, and we want to kind of encourage that to transition sooner rather than later. Like, for example, like reaching out for help. Like that should definitely be a student process that they should start practicing in 10th grade. Adults, we want to kind of like start transitioning you out of the process as much as we can, as they go from 10th, 11th into 12th. And by the time they're in 12th grade, we really do push them to be navigating much of this process on their own. We communicate directly with students. We kind of encourage them to take ownership in their process. They also take ownership in the consequences. And so all those different things are developmentally appropriate. And we want to encourage you as the adults, if you're watching this, to help start that transition now in 10th grade. Doesn't mean just like throw them to the wolves, but I think encourage them, like, hey, if you feel like as the parent or guardian want to reach out to a teacher, instead of just blasting an email out, sit down with your student and draft one together and have them send it. They can say, hey, my parent or guardian is on this email, I've CC'd them, but so they'll get the response. But I'm curious, like, it looks like I didn't do well on my last test. Was there something that you noticed on my test that maybe I could improve in, and is there an opportunity for maybe to retake it? Instead of that coming from a parent, that hits so much better with teachers in particular, but it practices that core skill. So sometimes students end up in a pitfall, and 9th and 10th grade tends to kind of set some tone in relation to what happens after high school. And so I think it's important to really just understand that it is not yet too late to kind of rectify some things. We have opportunities for credit recovery and remediation. And so depending on what the circumstances are, we can intervene and we can improve. And so what I don't want 10th graders to really be feeling is like, oh man, I've really blew it and there's nothing else I can do. There's things that we can do still. It does take things happening and it will require hard work, but it is something that you could totally do. Because what we don't want to do is really slam the doors to success and like opportunities really after you finish high school. We want to keep all those opportunities open for students to pursue anything that their heart desires realistically. So please don't slam that door. Keep it available. Okay, this next section we're going to kind of dive into some common things that are related to our California university systems, so our University of California or UC system and our California State University or CSU systems. These are called the A through G requirements. Good chances you probably heard about these a little bit last year. I know your students did. As long as they were with us, we did some activities with them. We've kind of gone over it. And some just basic information about a reminder of what the requirements are, some examples of the classes. I'm going to kind of honestly breeze through some of these. I'm not going to explain a ton because number one is we set students up on a track that meets A through G. Okay, students have to kind of actively work off of that track, meaning they're going to fail classes or get D's or like have conversations with us that says we do not want to do this, and like we will still try to talk you into it probably. But realistically, most of your graduation requirements honestly match what the A through G requirements are, with a few distinct exceptions, which as we go through these next slides, I'll call out. One important note that applies to all of these classes is to have your grade count towards graduation. A student has to basically not fail. Anything D- or higher counts to earn credits towards their graduation and diploma requirements. For these A through G requirements, the grade level bumps up to a C- or better in these A through G classes. The vast majority of our classes at North Tahoe High School are A through G level classes. Either they're approved or required for that. A couple examples of ones that maybe are not would be like a TA class, our PE classes, pathways, learning centers, things like that are not considered A through G level classes, but even like leadership and history classes and things like that all are. Okay, so we want to encourage balance, and we will hit on that heavy as we start talking a little bit about 11th grade, because students tend to kind of like really blow up their 11th grade year. And we really want to kind of encourage finding a better balance in terms of what they're taking on and not really overcommitting and causing a bunch of undue stress in their lives that really can backfire in some ways too. So as we work through this, I'm just going to hit on the main requirements, give you a couple examples, and we'll breeze through these A through G requirements. The first one is history. All students need 2 years of history. And so 10th grade is when that history sequence kind of starts, and they actually need 3 years to graduate from high school. So as long as they're passing their classes, this is an easy one to get. And as long as they're getting those C's or better. So history, world history or HUG, U.S. history at the AP and not, and then government, the semester-long government class actually falls in this section as well. The next one in the B category is English. Students need all 4 years, 8 semesters of English. Okay, and so every class, and this is one that sometimes if kids blow it for some reason, this is one that we need to focus on remediating quickly. So again, if a student gets a D in pre-AP English 1 last year, for example, we need to fix that through either summer school or our Edgenuity credit recovery and try to make sure that gets fixed right away so that you can re-get on the A through G pathway and reopen doors. The next one is math. Math is required for 3 years. That's similar to what our graduation requirement is. However, the coursework is different. So the only A through G math courses that are approved are our integrated math 1 through 3 sequence. We have QRAT, which is senior math, AP pre-calculus, AP calculus, and if we ever offer statistics at the AP level, that's also an AP math or A through G math course that you could take. Business math is not a math course in relation to college. Also, Intro to Integrated Math is not considered a math course in relation to college. For these requirements as well, you must get through at least Integrated Math 3. That is the minimum eligibility requirement to file your application with any of the CSUs or UCs. Beyond that is extra and bonus and encourage. That's that green 4. They do want to see students pursuing this because it's an important class in a lot of different majors. And so this is one additional way to demonstrate that you're ready for college. The D area is laboratory science, so 2 years are required. It's actually the same as our high school graduation requirements of life science and a physical science. So we actually put 9th graders in biology and 10th graders in chemistry, and that captures both the A through G requirements as well as our graduation requirements. Those 3 and 4s that are green, again, are highly encouraged, but students will qualify if they do not have those or if only had 3, but it will help move them from meeting the minimum qualifications to then becoming competitive in that process of applying to colleges which essentially judge you based on what you've taken in high school. Some examples of the courses are down there as well. E is language other than English or world language, and so this is one area that is different than our graduation requirements. A student can graduate from high school with a high school diploma without ever taking a world language. We essentially put all students into a world language in ninth grade for the most part. But for A through G, you actually have to take 2 years of the same world language. So you can't take French 1 and Spanish 1. You have to take French 1 and 2 or Spanish 1 and 2, for example. And so that is an area that students will do. Some of our Spanish classes actually enter at a more advanced level. So we're not going to get into this in this session, but students can actually in math as well as in world language do something called validation, which means by taking higher levels of things can potentially validate a deficiency, meaning like an F or a D that is historic, or in some cases like omissions. So by an example is here in the world language, if a ninth grader came in maybe through our dual immersion program or as a native Spanish speaker and started in Spanish 3 for Spanish speakers, that would actually fulfill 3 years of a world language. And so they would get 1 year of high school credit, but when they actually enter the stuff on their application, it will validate prior years. And it's looked at as completing kind of a 3rd year of this world language. And if they didn't take a 2nd year, they would actually be considered complete and actually advanced in this area. The next one is visual or performing art, VPA. You need 1 year of a visual performing art, and that is also different from our graduation requirement. So in our graduation, it's world language or an art class. In A through G, they separate those out and have different requirements. So this year you need 1 year of a visual performing art, and it has to be the same one in both semesters, at our school at least. Some examples of those are listed down below. And then finally is G. So we went through A through G. Okay, so each of these subject area requirements is CPE or college preparatory elective. This one is honestly the easiest for most students to actually get because it basically is any extras from some of the other areas, but some of the examples down below also fit into this area. So you do see Intro to Integrated Math in there. You see business math, our independent study leadership class, some of our, basically all of our CTE classes would be listed in there, and then as well as economics for a semester. So this one is actually fairly easy to get because it fits into a lot of other areas that students will still take classes in. Just to give you a little bit of an overview about some of the college process, since we dive into that, and students start to think a little bit sometimes in 10th grade about how this whole process starts to look and how they're getting prepared for it, is a lot of times if I ask someone to describe what they see on the screen here, they would basically be able to tell me a little bit about this tree. Maybe they probably could hopefully tell it was a tree, but they might not be able to tell if it was alive or if it was knocked over. Unless you were really well educated on trees, you might not be able to tell me what kind of tree it is. You might not be able to tell me if it had leaves on it or if it was dormant, where it was located, if it was like in a very fertile area or the desert. Like you can't really tell a whole lot. And this is what a lot of people tend to think the college application review looks like. They're looking at very, very particular things and nothing else beyond that. In some cases, yes, this is probably the closest that you could estimate maybe a CSU or like a Cal Poly or Sacramento State. They tend to review based on your academics and not a whole lot else. And so this is probably an example maybe of what a CSU might look like. However, most other colleges, including like the UC system, tend to look at students like this. More of a holistic view, getting a better understanding of not only the student and what they're doing in and out of school, but also their community, the area around them. What resources do they have access to versus other students? And they really take into account what the student is as a whole bringing to the college process and application process. And so spending time on volunteering, having a job, caring for siblings, playing a sport, doing volunteer work, all of these things are very beneficial and worth spending time on, both for the student development, but also for their future development. So I want to encourage you guys, if you're looking at primarily focusing and spending time on your academics, think about broadening that scope a little bit because yes, academics are crucial. They're one of the key components. They're kind of the trunk of the tree, but there's so much more to students that they need to see and want to see to help them along this process. So a couple little things on the overview of what we're looking at for this sophomore year. So one of the main things to really focus on is just continuing to maintain or improve grades. This is the year that for CSUs and UCs, they actually don't use ninth grade in their GPA calculation, and they only look at A through G level courses in that calculation. So in 10th and 11th grade is the 2 years when those two systems, the CSU and UC systems, actually will use the grades that are reported and earned to calculate their freshman admissions GPA. So one failed class can also kind of trickle down into future classes, right? So really focusing on trying to keep those grades up so that when they move into the next year's classes, it really is not a struggle going forward. Some classes are done in isolation. Many others, though, kind of build on each other, especially in math. Sometimes science-based classes, they all can, like, if you struggle in one class, sometimes it creates a wave of struggle that will follow you unless we kind of interrupt it somehow. Get involved in something that you're passionate about. Many of our students play sports. We require volunteering hours, which we'll talk about in a second again. But go find a job. Look for internships. And also write some of these things down. It's going to be something that you're going to have to recollect and recall later. Make a note, create a spreadsheet, start a notebook or a calendar of what you're doing and how much time you're doing it and the stuff you're learning about yourself through it. Okay, but try not to do too many things. You want to kind of do something that's going to make a point. You're going to want to try to be a little creative and purposeful with how you're spending your time. They're looking mainly for depth, and when we like colleges and careers and things like that, not necessarily how many things that you do, but like how in depth and how engaged are you in those processes. And then think about continuing to challenge yourself, maybe in AP classes or more advanced level classes that you might have opportunities to extend into next year. A couple other things to kind of really dive into as well in the sophomore year is really starting to think about how this world of colleges and in fact, really careers, that's actually a big component, is what am I interested in and why? Because sometimes we want to actually identify some interests before we actually start developing like lists of colleges and stuff so that we can make sure that those lists help you achieve a goal that you're aiming for. So go to the college fairs, go down to the college reps who are here. Come talk to Jordy in the office or our career tech and be able to kind of explore some of these different things that maybe you have access to in our local community and see how that applies to broader scopes of careers down the road. If you're traveling around the country or the state or the area, stop by colleges while you're there. Go and just take a tour or even just walk around without a tour. Many campuses are open. Getting exposure is one of the best ways to determine what you like or maybe dislike about kind of the college process. Once again, starting to track information is also helpful. We also use SCORE, SCOIR, pronounced SCORE like the score of the game. It's our college and career kind of research tool, so students all have access to it. And it's a very helpful piece of information that is comprehensive that students start to really dive into using in 10th grade, but we'll use with students throughout the remainder of high school. So I want to take a few seconds and just talk through a little bit about testing. Testing has dramatically changed in the last couple years since COVID, really, and that is still a thing and is anticipated to still be a thing and still be in flux. And so one of the things that I think has changed that 10th graders should probably know more about is that historically, schools, colleges, four-year colleges in particular, have required college admissions testings like the SAT or the ACT. And more now, they're either not required at all or not considered at all, or more commonly test optional. So a couple examples. As of this recording and for the foreseeable future, the CSU system and the UC system are test free. They will not look at your test scores. So if you're primarily targeting schools of those natures, there's no real point in necessarily spending a lot of time preparing for those SAT or ACT exams. There might be some benefits that we could discuss individually, but as in general, it's not something that you necessarily even have to do. If you feel you're a strong test taker, maybe consider it. But in reality, if you're like dreading these tests and you're spending a lot of time preparing and it's causing a lot of stress and anxiety, maybe you don't even need to do it. Good portion of private schools or out-of-state public schools are test optional, meaning like you can choose. If you feel like it's helpful and you're scoring well, then you can choose to submit it as part of your application. If you're not happy with your score, then you don't have to. And it reorganizes the emphasis of how colleges review your applications. And so it just builds the other components of your application into higher levels of importance. We do offer a couple things throughout the school year, and it's anticipated to continue in the future. But we do have a fall PSAT exam, typically around October. That's for 10th and 11th grade students at North Tahoe High School. And then we also offer a spring SAT, and that will be open to juniors and seniors. And so that usually happens around March typically. So those are both school-based tests that students will take at school, and those do not cost students any money. So they're free and accessible to any student that wants to take them that fall within that grade range. Additionally, this is not something that you'll be doing this year as a sophomore, but in 11th grade, students actually start taking our state assessments. There's one window in 1 year that students will take their state assessments called the CASP. And so they'll take tests in math, English, and science. And so the hard part is sometimes these tests don't have many directly relatable and immediate student benefits. And so many times students and even families maybe don't take them super seriously. They are actually fairly important tests though, not only for the student, but also for us at school, as well as maybe their steps after high school. So we are actively increasing our efforts and energies. We want students to do their best work. Does that mean they have to score 4s on these tests? No, we just want them to put forth their best effort on these tests and not blow them off. Okay, because it does impact us as a school. So students who have graduated and taken these in the past, it changes how we address students who will then take them in the future, as well as programs and kind of steps and policies that we have in place to help encourage student growth and success. Okay, so it is connected with recognitions and things like that as well towards graduation. So we're just giving you the heads up in sophomore year that these tests will be coming next year, and they are important, and we want students to be prepared. And realistically, we just want them to show us what they know and do their best work on them. Additionally, in the testing world is this thing called advanced placement, or AP. Students tend to, in 10th grade, maybe have the opportunity to take 1 or 2 AP classes, typically like AP Human Geography and AP Spanish. And so those 2 classes also come with exams at the end of those courses each May. There's more AP classes that will become available in 11th and 12th grade down the road. But generally, they come with this end of course exam that we want to encourage students to consider and preparing for, but is something that is not required. They can choose to do that. And so students have to kind of like think about how much do I want to prepare myself for these exams. These AP tests do, if you pass them, they're scored out of 5. Typically a 3, 4, or 5 is considered passing. And usually those passing scores, you can actually report to colleges down the road, and they likely will give you some sort of college level credit for that passing test score. So the registration is an early registration, and we know that. College Board is in charge of that. We don't set the dates. College Board does, which is the organization that runs AP and the SAT. They register online through an AP classroom. Their teachers will provide them a join code in their AP classes themselves. And then students must go and actively indicate on that if they're going to be sitting for that exam. Every year we go over this information, but the final deadline to register for this exam is in November typically. Okay, and there are no extensions, there are no exceptions. So if the student is not registered on that online platform when that registration deadline closes, they will not take that test in May. Okay, there is a payment for these tests. And that's a little bit variable depending on funding sources at the district, but generally in the past we've been able to secure some subsidies that will help offset the overall cost, but each year we'll kind of like share the information about the upcoming tests so you can make decisions on if that's a good idea or not for your family. Kind of as we wrap up, and just a couple last minute reminders. So we do encourage students, especially as they transition into the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years, to really start practicing the habit of getting into at home of studying 1 to 2 hours a night. Okay, so you're going to have a lot of stuff that can't be just accomplished in school. And so there will be some take-home work, and it might be actively assigned, but it also might be something that you as a student or a family need to think a little bit ahead about, like, hey, we're going to be out of town, or I have a test coming up, so I don't have an assignment to do, but I know I need to get ready for my quiz on Friday in math, and so I'm going to do some practice problems or revisit my notes. Okay, and so it's sometimes assigned, but sometimes it's something you have to go beyond doing, so that studying is not just homework or assignments. It's being ready to walk into class the next day and do your best work and take a test or take a pop quiz or answer questions or reflect on the information that you're supposed to be learning at any given time. And so this is also not only practice for here, but it's also a good practice to get in habit for when students actually transition into college. So this is a really important kind of discipline for families and students to start implementing, especially starting in this 10th grade year. Just a reminder as well, so community service is a thing. So that is a requirement for all students to graduate from high school. All TTUSD students need 30 hours total by the time that they get to the end of their senior year to receive their high school diploma. And so we tend at North Tahoe High School to break those out by year. So we kind of break out 6 hours in freshman year, and then 8 hours therefore every year, and that gets that 30 total hours. If you missed hours, so you did 3 hours last year as a freshman, you will have to make those hours up in other years. Okay, so those are things that you have to just keep in mind as you're working through. If you wait until to do 30 hours till your senior year, you still will need to do 30 hours. We do prorate this, so if you were not in TTUSD schools for any of these years, we will not expect you to have those hours. On that same note, we won't accept hours from years you were in TTUSD. So we're going to focus on getting those hours in our local community, but we're not going to have you, if you enroll as a junior, for example, you're not going to be expected to have the hours from 9th and 10th grade year. We'd expect 16 hours at that point. The secondary requirement, again, is your pathways grade. So that pass or no pass, they do expect those hourly requirements to be submitted. So you could do 30 hours as a freshman and be good to go for graduation. But if you don't continue to do the hours, it will cause you to not pass your pathways class. Okay. There's some forms and things like that that you have to just fill out, but this should hopefully be a little bit old hat for most sophomores. But just a reminder, don't let these sneak up on you. The vast majority of our opportunities in a given year tend to be in the fall to early winter timeframes. Once we come into that second semester, the winter is a little bit slower, to be honest. And so between January and maybe March or April, there's fewer opportunities for students to go out in the community and get some community service in a fairly accessible way, and it picks up a little bit towards the end of the school year once the weather gets a little bit better. So 2 more reminders and then we're going to be done. So I mentioned Score earlier. That is our online platform for students. They log in via Clever. I would encourage you to sit with them and watch kind of like what they're doing. They can show you some of the tools, but as students work through, we do this in Pathways classes. We use these in our ILP meetings as well. Okay, so these meetings, this individual learning plan meetings for 10th graders typically starts around December, and we will send out information about the opportunity to book your individual learning plan meeting for 10th graders. These are not required. We will not focus on meeting every single 10th grader in this given time frame. We do that for seniors typically, so we will make sure that we sit down with every single senior, and oftentimes junior year classes as well. But it is encouraged for students, and we'll have a window of time when students and families will be able to set up those meetings to sit down with your counselor. We kind of go over progress, we go over interest areas, we talk about some academic planning and opportunities, and make some like larger scale discussion around different things that will come up as you're navigating through 10th grade year. So I do want to share lastly that we will have some drop-in times as you watch, when we share this video. If you got the email and you're accessing it, if you're viewing this on YouTube later on in 10th grade or things like that, good chances these drop-in times have gone away. They've already happened, good chance. But if you're viewing this from an email that we send out, we will share a couple of dates, usually 1 or 2, often 1 in the afternoon and 1 in the morning, when the school counselor, myself or Ms. Django Cohen, whoever is in charge of the 10th grade in that given year, will be available for just drop-in questions. If you watch this and you're curious about something and you had a question about how this works or about testing or things like that, and you had a couple minutes, you could swing by in those time, and it's really an open forum to address any questions that come up in this conversation. And then we will work hard on hosting one in Spanish as well.